What if I told you that an animal on Earth might hold the secret to living up to 200 years? Sounds pretty impossible, right? Well, this animal has shown us that it is possible to live for that long, because it has survived for centuries. Yes, somewhere in the freezing Arctic Ocean, something is alive right now that was also alive before the American Civil War. It has watched entire human civilizations rise, collapse, and get replaced. It has outlived every president, every empire, every person who has ever lived in the last 2 centuries. And it has done all of this quietly in freezing water, without a single doctor's appointment. It's not a myth, it's a whale, and not the biggest one, not the most feared one. On paper, it shouldn't even be remarkable. But locked inside its biology is something that has stopped scientists cold. Something that doesn't just explain how it lives this long, but something that, if we understood it fully, could rewrite the rules of how long we live. It could even enable humans to live for more than 200 years. But for decades, we didn't know anything about this. We walked past this creature like it wasn't important, till one day, when someone decided to look closely at it, and what they found rewrote everything we thought we understood about aging. So what is hiding inside this creature? And more importantly, why does it already exist inside you? Let's get into it. The bowhead whale is one of those creatures that the more you learn about it, the more your brain just refuses to accept what it's hearing because it sounds so much like make-believe. First, it can live for over 200 years. Scientists confirmed this when they analyzed the ancient Inuit hunting tools that were found embedded in the change of bowhead whales caught in the 20th century. After the analysis, they tracked those tools back to the 1800s. So, apparently this whale had been swimming around for over a century, but the bowhead doesn't just appear to have a long life, it is also massive. I'm talking 60 feet long and it weighs over 100 tons. It is categorized as one of the largest animals on the planet, and in biology, that is supposed to be a problem. A big one. That's because in biology, there is a rule called Peto's paradox, which basically says that the bigger an organism is, the more cells it has. And the more cells you have, the more opportunities there are for mutations to occur, for DNA to misfire, for cancer to develop. Going by this rule, the bowhead whale should not be able to live this long, but it does. Bowhead whales show almost no sign of cancer. Their bodies just hold. And this made scientists so confused. But honestly, I would be too. So, how is this creature, which is basically a walking cancer, able to survive for 200 years? What made it possible for this creature to live for so long? Well, researchers at the University of Rochester decided that they were going to find the answer to this question. So they sat down with the bowhead whale, an entire genetic animal, and started looking for whatever was capable of keeping this animal alive for 2 centuries. This took them years of research because obviously sequencing a genome of this scale isn't a Tuesday afternoon project. But finally they found something. Actually, let me rephrase that. They found several things. Because the bowhead whale's genome isn't just slightly different from ours, it's operating on what genuinely feels like a different set of rules. First, the DNA repair system. Now, every living thing on Earth has some version of this. Every time you are stressed out or exposed to too much radiation, your cells get damaged. Thankfully, your body has mechanisms that can go in and fix that damage before it even becomes a problem. But in the bowhead whale, that system is running at a totally different level. Think of it this way, your body's DNA repair is like a maintenance crew that shows up when something breaks. They patch it, they leave, and they come back when something breaks again. But the bowhead whale's version is less like a repair crew and more like a full-time surveillance team that never clocks out, meaning it catches damage before it even spreads, and it can even fix things that haven't been fully broken yet. So if they can heal at a fast pace, their cells should wear out and die faster, right? Well, wrong. You see, every time your cells divide, there is a chance for an error, a mutation, or a small copying mistake in your DNA that can be passed down to the next cell, and the next, and the next. Most of the time, these mistakes are harmless, but over the decades, they accumulate. And that accumulation is, in a very real sense, what aging is. So now imagine a system that keeps up, and you get the bowhead whale. Now, sitting in the middle of the specific genes responsible for all these is a small single protein, and honestly, the fact that it took this long to find it is almost as strange as the protein itself. Because this molecule isn't exotic, it's not some deep-sea anomaly that only exists in whales, it actually exists in us too. Though not like this, at least not in these quantities. But what is so special about this protein, and what does it do in the bowhead whale to keep it alive for so long? The protein is called CIRBP, cold-inducible Na binding protein. And yes, I know the name is doing a lot of heavy lifting in a very small space. It's a mouthful even for me, so allow me to break it down. Practically every cell in your body contains DNA, and that DNA is constantly being read, copied, and used to produce proteins that keep you functioning. But DNA is fragile. More fragile than you realize. It can easily get damaged by UV radiation, by toxins, and by oxidative stress, which is basically just the chemical byproduct of your cells doing their normal jobs. And every time your DNA gets damaged and isn't repaired correctly, you age a little. Every time a copy gets made with a mistake in it, that mistake lives on. Now, here's where it gets interesting. DNA replication has a built-in limitation that most people have never heard of, and it's called the telomere problem. At the end of every long string of chromosomes are protective caps called telomeres. Their job is basically to stop the ends of your chromosomes from fraying, the same way the plastic tip on a shoelace stops it from unraveling. But every time a cell divides, those telomere caps get slightly shorter. And eventually, after enough divisions, the telomeres get so short that the cell, stops dividing altogether. And this is a disaster. Because you see, after it enters the lockdown state called senescence, it can't really function properly. It can't repair itself, and so it just sits there. But it doesn't sit idly. It begins to release signals that damage the surrounding tissue. Now, if that happens enough byproducts, across enough cells and for decades, it turns into aging. Thankfully, there is an enzyme called telomerase that can rebuild telomeres. And in theory, if it were active enough, it could slow this whole process down significantly. The problem is that in most human cells, telomerase activity is extremely low. It's there, but it's barely doing anything. And this is what makes the CIRBP truly fascinating. In bowhead whales, CIRBP is produced in unusually high quantities, and it does not just protect DNA passively, it actively supports the kind of repair processes that keep genetic damage from accumulating the way it does in most mammals. Its job is basically to move with the cell repair machines, stabilizing things, reducing errors, and keeping the system running cleaner for longer. So at this point, scientists had a protein. They knew what it did in the whale, they knew it was present in unusually high quantities, they knew it was sitting at the center of one of the most efficient DNA repair systems ever observed in a mammal. And once scientists discovered what the CIRBP can do, they did something that should not really surprise you if you have been watching the news. They introduced the protein into human cells in a controlled laboratory environment, and then they watched. Did it work? Well, it depends on the way you look at it. Now, I want to be careful here because what happened next is real, documented, and verifiable, but it's also easy to overstate. So let me just tell you exactly what the data showed. The human cells became more resistant to stress, specifically the kind of cellular stress that accumulates over time and contributes directly to aging. I'm talking about oxidative stress, heat stress, and the general wear that your cells absorb just from functioning day after day. As soon as CIRBP were elevated, those cells handled it better. They didn't break down quickly, and their DNA repair improved, which is kind of the whale game, because at the end of the day, aging is just damage accumulating faster than repair can keep up. But then, scientists did something that some people still argue they should have never done. They also tested the effects on simpler organisms, and one of the test subjects was the fruit fly. Now, to everyone who probably didn't take biology class that seriously, the fruit fly is just a tiny and unremarkable insect. And they could not be more wrong, because that same fruit fly is one of the most important research animals on the planet, because its lifespan is short, its genetics are well understood, and results show up fast. So when CIRBP activity was increased in these flies, the same insects that could not live for a maximum of 3 months suddenly lived for a longer period. As you can already imagine, this was very surprising to scientists, because the fruit flies have been part of an experiment that actually led to our understanding of how genes control lifespan. So when a protein pulled from a 200-year-old whale started extending the life of a fruit fly in a lab, scientists were beyond amazed. Now, before you get too excited, remember that these are early results, flies are not humans, and lab conditions are not real life. Scientists are careful about this, but at the end of the day, the protein still exists, and it's already inside us, just barely doing anything, and the question bubbling in the scientist's mind was how we can wake it up. Which means the next question becomes unavoidable. What does this actually mean for us? If you have totally ignored my previous warning and you are still excited, just know that you are not alone. Because at the end of the day, it's pretty amazing. I mean, come on, a protein from a whale that lives 200 years makes human cells more resilient, improves DNA repair, and extends the lifespan of flies in a lab. That's the best discovery ever, right? Well, before you go on Amazon and ask where you can buy this protein, I need you to slow down for a second. Because the gap between this works in isolated cells and this works in a living human being is one of the largest gaps in all of science. And it's important to understand why. So here lies the major problem. Your body's not actually a collection of isolated cells sitting in a dish. It's 37 trillion cells, organized into tissues, organs, and systems that are all talking to each other constantly. So, being able to introduce a protein into a single cell in a controlled environment is one thing, but getting that same protein to behave the same way inside a living, breathing, enormously complex biological system is something else entirely. And then there is the problem of delivery. How exactly do you get elevated CIRBP activity into the right cells in the right quantities without disrupting everything else? And yes, I know that gene therapy has made some real progress in the past years, but let's not forget that it's still one of the most demanding areas in medicine. So in a case like this, your first reaction should not be, how can I get it in my DNA, but rather what else will change in me when I start modifying how a protein is expressed in my body. And if the answer to that doesn't still scare you, just know that there is still the cancer question. Because one of the reasons your cells stop dividing after a certain number of replications is actually a protective mechanism. Cells that divide indefinitely are, by definition, cancer cells. So when you start exploring ways to extend cellular lifespan, you have to be extraordinarily careful that you're not accidentally removing the brakes that stop your cells from going rogue. This is not a surprise to scientists. They know this. And this may just be the only thing holding them back from turning our lives into the kind of thing we watch in the cinema on a big screen. But if scientists actually do this, does it mean humans could live to 200 years? Honestly, nobody knows. What we do know is that CIRBP is real, its effects in the lab are real, and the bowhead whale has demonstrated, just by existing for 2 centuries, that radical longevity is biologically possible in a mammal. And if scientists ever have a doubt about it, all they have to do is go to the Arctic Ocean and see it swimming around just minding its business. But we have another problem, because in science, just knowing something is possible is the first and hardest step. And considering the fact that for the longest time we didn't know anything, it is extremely hard for scientists to just do nothing. So it is safe to assume that currently, in laboratories that most people will never hear about, scientists are starting to ask if it is slightly possible to make this reality possible in humans without grievous side effects. While that remains a top government secret, what we do know is that a whale has been swimming through freezing Arctic water for 2 centuries. It has outlived empires, languages, and entire human civilizations. And inside its cells, quiet and unbothered, a single protein has been doing something that our best biology said wasn't supposed to be possible. After decades of living in oblivion, we have finally found it. Now, whether CIRBP ever becomes something that changes human medicine or even expands the human lifestyle is still an open question. It could take decades to answer, but it makes one wonder. If this is what we found in one whale, in one genome, after decades of barely looking, what else is out there? What other answers are swimming through water we haven't explored yet? Well, make sure you subscribe to our channel as we will explore more of it in our next video.